Chapter 3 of All Quiet on the Western Front by Rich Marie Remarque. Reinforcements have arrived. The vacancies have filled, and the sacks of straw in the huts are already booked. Some of them are old, but there are 25 men of a later draft from the base. They are about 2 years younger than us. Crop nudges me. Seen the infants? I nod. We stick out our chests, shave in our open, shove our hands in our pockets, inspect the recruits, and feel ourselves Stone Age veterans. Katazinski joins us. We stroll past the horse boxes and go over to the reinforcements, who are already being issued with gas masks and coffee. Long time since you've had anything decent to eat, eh? Cat asked one of the youngsters. He grimaces. For breakfast, turnip bread. Lunch, turnip stew. Supper, turnip curtlets and turnip salad. Cat gives a knowing whistle. Bread made of turnips? You've been in luck. It's nothing new for it to be made of sawdust. But what do you say about hard-caught beans? Have some? The youngster turns red. You can't kid me. Katazinski merely says, Fetch your mestin. Oh, curiously. He takes us to a tub beside his straw sack. Sure enough, it is half full of beef and beans. Katazinski plants himself in front of it like a general and says, Sharp eyes and light fingers. That's what the Persians say. We are surprised. Great guts, Cat. How did you come by that? I ask him. Ginger was glad I took it. I gave him 3 pieces of parachute silk for it. Cold beans taste fine, too. Patronizing, he gives the youngster a portion and says, Next time you come with your mess tin, have a cigar or chew of tobacco in your other hand. Get me? Then he turns to us. Get off scot-free, of course. We couldn't do without Katazinski. He has a sixth sense. There are such people everywhere, but one does not appreciate it at first. Every company has one or two. Katazinski is the smartest, I know. By trade, he is a cobbler, I believe, but that hasn't to do anything with it. He understands all trades. It's a good thing to be friends with him, as Crop and I are. And Hay with us, too. More or less, but Hay is rather the executive arm, operating under Cat's orders when things come to blows. For that, he has his qualifications. For example, we land at night in some entirely unknown spot, a sorry hole that has been eaten out to the walls. We are quartered in a small, dark factory, adapted to the purpose. There are beds in it, or rather bunks, a couple of wooden beams over which wire netting is stretched. Wire netting is hard, and there's nothing to put on it. Our waterproof sheets are too thin. We use our blankets to cover ourselves. Cat looks at the place and then says to Hay Westus, Come with me. They go off to explore. Half an hour later, they are back again with arms full of straw. Cat has found a horse box with straw in it. Now we might sleep if we weren't so terribly hungry. Crop asks an artilleryman who has been some time in this neighborhood. Is there a canteen anywhereabouts? Is there a what? He laughs. There's nothing to be had here. You won't find so much as crust of bread here. Aren't there any inhabitants here at all, then? He spits. Yes, a few. But they hang around the cookhouse and beg. That's a bad business. Then they'll have to pull in our boats and wait till the rations come up in the morning. But I see Cat has put on his cap. Where to Cat? I asked. Just to explore the place a bit. He strolls off. The artilleryman grins scornfully. Go ahead and explore, but don't strain yourself in carrying what you find. Disappointed, we lay down and consider whether we couldn't have to go at the iron rations. But it's too risky, so we try to get a wink of sleep. Crop divides a cigarette and hands me half. Tijan gives an account of his national dish, broad beans and bacon. He despises it when not flavored with bog myrtle, and, for God's sake, let it all be cooked together, not the potatoes, the beans and bacon separately. Someone growls that he will pound Titan into the bog myrtle if he doesn't shut up. Then all becomes quiet in the big room, only candles flickering from the necks of a couple of bottles, and then artilleryman splitting every now and then. We are just dozing off when the door opens, and Cat appears. I think I must be dreaming. He has 2 loaves of bread under his arms and a blood-stained sandbag full of horseflesh in his hand. The artilleryman's pipe drops from his mouth. He feels the bread, real bread by God, and still hot, too. Cat gives no explanation, but he has the bread. The rest doesn't matter. I'm sure that if we were planted down in the middle of the desert, in half an hour he would have gathered together a supper of roast meat, dates, and wine. Cut some wood, he says curly to Hay. Then he hauls out a frying pan from under his coat and a handful of salt as well as a lump of fat from his pocket. He has thought of everything. Hay makes a fire on the floor. It lights up in the empty room of the factory. We climb out of bed. The artilleryman hesitates. He wonders whether to praise Cat, and so perhaps gain a little for himself. But Katasinski doesn't even see him. He might as well be thin air. He goes off cursing. Cat knows the way to roast horse flesh so that it's tender. It shouldn't be put straight into the pan. That makes it tough. It should be boiled first in a little water. With our knives, we sat around in a circle and fill our bellies. That is Cat. If for 1 hour in the year of something eatable were to be had in one place only within that hour, as if moved by vision, he would put on his cap and go out and walk directly there, as though following a compass, and find it. He finds everything. If it is cold, a small stove and wood, hay and straw, a table and chairs, but above all food. It's uncanny. One would think he conjured it out of the air. His masterpiece with 4 boxes of lobsters. Admittedly, we would rather have had a good beefsteak. We had settled ourselves on a sunny side of the hut. There is the smell of tar, of summer, and of sweaty feet. Cat sits beside me. He likes to talk. Today we have done an hour's saddling drill because Taijin failed to salute a major smartly enough. Cat can't get it out of his head. You take it from me, we are losing the war because we can't salute to well? He says, Crop stalks up, with his breeches rolled up and his bare feet. He lays out his washed socks to dry on the grass. Cat turns his eyes to heaven, lets out a mighty fart, and says meditatively, Every little bean must be heard as well as seen. The two begin to argue. At the same time, they lay a bottle of beer on the result of the air fight that's going on above us. Katazinski won't budge from the opinion, which is an old front hog. He rhymes. Give 'em all the same grub and all the same pay, and the war wouldn't be over and done in a day. Kropp, on the other hand, is a thinker. He proposes that a declaration of war should be a kind of popular festival with entrance tickets and bands like a bullfight. Then in an arena, the ministers and generals of 2 countries, dressed in bathing drawers and armed with clubs, can have it out among themselves. Whoever survives, his country wins. That would be much simpler and a more just than arrangement where the wrong people did the fighting. The subject is dropped. Then the conversation turns to drill. A picture comes before me. Burning midday in the barrack yard. The heat hangs over the square. The barracks are deserted. Everything sleeps. All one hear is the drummers practicing. They have installed themselves somewhere in practice, broken dully monotonously. What a concord. Midday heat, barrack square, and drummers beating. The windows of the barracks are empty and dark. For some of them, trousers are hanging to dry. The rooms are cool, and one looks towards them longingly. Oh, dark, musty platoon huts with an iron bedsteads, the shearer bedding, the lockers, and the stools. Even you can become the object's desire. Out there you have a faint resemblance to home. Your room's full of smell of stale food, sleep, smoke, and clothes. Had paints it all in lively colors. What would we not give to be able to return to it? Farther back than our thoughts dare not go. Those early mornings of instruction, what are the parts of the 98 rifle? The midday hours of physical training, the pianist forward. By the right quick march, report to the cookhouse for potato peeling. We indulge in the Reziminsk scenes. Crop laughs suddenly and says, "Change at London." That was our corporal's favorite game. London is a railway junction, in order that our fellows going on shouldn't get there. Himmelstoss used to play the change in the barrack room. We had to learn that at London, Lahani, or something like that. To reach the branch line, we must pass through a subway. The beds represent the subway, and each man stood at the attention on the left side of his bed. Then came the command, "Change at Lani," and like lightning, everyone scrambled under the bed and to the opposite side. We practiced this for hours on end. Meanwhile, the German aeroplane has been shot down. Like a comet, it bursts into a streamer of smoke and falls headlong. Kropp has lost the bottle of beer. Disgruntledly, he counts out the money from his wallet. Surely Himmelstoss was a very different fellow as a postman. Say I, after that Albert's disappointment has subsided, then how does it come that he's such a bully as a drill sergeant? The question reviews Kropp, more particularly as he hears that no more beer in the canteen. It's not only Himmelstoss, there are lots of them. As sure as they get a stripe of star or they become different men, just as they think they'd swallow concrete. That's the uniform, I suggest. Roughly speaking, it is, says Cat, and prepares for a long speech. But the root of the matter lies somewhere. For instance, if you train a dog to eat potatoes and then afterward put a piece of meat in front of him, he'll snap at it. It's his nature. And if you give a man a little bit of authority, he behaves in the same way. He snaps at it too. The things are precisely the same, but himself, man, is essential, a beast. Only butters, it's only like a slice of bread, with a little decorum. The army is based on that. One man must always have the power over the other. The mischief is merely that each one has much too much power. A non-com can torment a private, lunatic, a non-com, a captain, a lieutenant, until he goes mad. Now, because they all soon acquire the habit more or less. Take a simple case. We are all marching back from under the parade ground dog-tired. When comes the order to sing, we sing spiritlessly, for it is all we can do to trudge along with our rifles. At once, the company is turned about and has to do another hour drill as punishment. On the march back, the order to sing is given again, and once more we start. Now, what's the use of all that? It's simply the company commander's head has been turned by having so much power, and nobody blames him. On contrary, he praised for being strict. That, of course, is the only trifling instance, but it holds also in a very different affairs. Now I ask you, let a man be whatever you like in peacetime. What a computation occupation, oh my gosh, is there in which he can behave like without getting a crack on the nose? He can only do that in the army. It goes to the heads of them. You see, and the more insignificant a man has been in civil life, the worse it takes him. They say, of course, there must be discipline, ventures Kropp meditatively. True, growls Cat. They always do. And it may be so, still it ought to become an abuse. But you try to explain that, the blacksmith or the laborer or the workman, you try to make the clear or peasant. And that's the most of them are here. All he sees is that has been put through the mill and sent to the front, and he knows well enough what he must do and what not. It's simply amazing, I tell you. That's the ordinary Tommy sticks it all up there in the front line. Simply amazing. No one protests. Everyone knows the drill ceases only in the front line and begins again a few miles behind. With all the absurdities of saluting and parade, it's the iron law that the soldier must be employed under every circumstance. Here Tijan comes up with a flushed face. He is so excited that he stutters. Beaming satisfaction, he stammers out, Himmelstas is on his way. He's coming to the front. Tijan has a special grudge against Himmelstas because of the way he educated him in the barracks. Tijan wets his bed. He does it at night in his sleep. Himmelstas maintained that it is a sheer laziness, an invented method worthy of himself for curing Tijan. He hunted up another piss-a-bed named Kudavuri from a neighboring unit, a quarter him with Tijan. In the huts, there were the usual bunks, one another and the other in pairs, with mattresses of wire netting. Himmelstas put these two so that one occupied the upper and the other the lower bunk. The man underneath of the course had a vile time. The next night they were changed over and the lower one put on the top so that he could relate. That was Himmelstas's system of self-education. The idea was low, but not ill convinced. Unfortunately, it accomplished nothing because the first assumption was wrong. It was not laziness in either of them. Anyone who looked at their sallow skin could see that the matter ended in one of them always sleeping on the floor, where he frequently caught cold. Meanwhile, Haiti sits down beside us. He winks at me and rubs his paws thoughtfully. We once spent the finest day of our army life together, the day before we left for the front. We had all been allotted to one of the recently formed requirements, but were first to be set back for the equipment to the garrison, not to the reinforcement depot or course, but to the other barracks. We were due to leave the next morning early. In the evening, we prepared ourselves to square accounts with Himmelstas. We had sworn for the past weeks to do this. Kropp had even gone so far as to propose entering to the postal service in peacetime in order to be Himmelstas's superior when he became a postman again. He revealed that in the thought of how he could grind him, it was this that made him impossible for him to crush us all together. We were always reckoned that later, at the end of the war, we would have our revenge on him. In the meantime, we decided to give him a good hiding. What could he do to us anyway if he didn't recognize us? And we left early in the morning. We knew which pub he used to visit every evening. Returning to the barracks, he had to go along a dark, uninhabited road where we waited for him behind a pile of stones. I had a bed cover with me. We trembled with suspense, hoping he would be alone. At the last, we heard the footsteps, which we recognized easily. So often had we heard it in the mornings as the door flew open, and he bawled, "Get up!" "Alone, whispered Kropp. "Alone." I slipped around a pile of stones to Tijan. Himmelstas seemed a little elevated. He was singing. His belt buckle gleamed. He came on unsuspectedly. We seized the bed cover, made a quick leap, threw it over his head, and behind pulled it round him so that he stood there in a white sack, unable to raise his arms. The singing stopped the moment Hay Westus was there, and spreading his arms, he shoved us back into the order to be first in. He put himself in a position with evident satisfaction, raised his arm like a signal, and his hand like a coal shovel, and fetched such a blow on the white sack as would have felled an ox. Himmelstas was thrown down, and he rolled 5 yards and started to yell. But we prepared for that and brought a cushion. Haiti squatted down, laid the cushion on his knees, about where Himmelstas's head was, and pressed it down the pillow. Immediately his voice was muffled. He let out Hay let him get a gasp of air every so often, when he would give him a mighty yell that was immediately hushed. Tijan unbuttoned Himmelsauce's braces and pulled down his trousers, holding the whip meantime in his teeth. Then he stood up and set to work. It was a wonderful picture. Himmelsauce on the ground, Hade bending over him with a fiendish grin, and his open mouth with bloodlust. Himmelsauce's head on his knees in convulsed striped drawers, the knock knees executing at every blow most original movements in the lowered breeches, and towering over them like a woodcutter, that infatigable Tijan. In the end, we had to drag him away to get our turn. Finally, Haiti stood Himmelsauce on his feet again and gave him one personal remonstrance as he stretched out his right arm preparatory to giving him a box on the ear. He looked as if he were going to reach down a star. Himmelsauce toppled over. Hades stood up again, made ready, and fetched him a second well-aimed beauty with the left hand. Himmelsauce yelled and made off of all fours. His striped postman's backside gleamed in the moonlight. We disappeared at full speed. Hades looked around once again and said with wrathful satisfaction and rather mysteriously, "Revenge is black pudding." Himmelsauce ought to have been pleased. His saying that we should each educate one another had borne fruit for himself. We had become successful students on his method. He never discovered whom he had to thank for the business. At any rate, he scored a bed cover out of it, for when we returned a few hours later to look for it, it was no longer to be found. That evening worked for us, more or less content to leave the next morning, and an old buffer was pleased to describe us as young heroes. Thank you for listening.